Hello, this is Nina Stoyan-Rosenzweig, and I am here interviewing Alice. Alice, would you pronounce your last name for us, please?
Primack.
Primack. The date is May 19th, 2021. And Alice, welcome. Could you start by just giving a little bit of background on where you were born, when, kind of your family background?
Well, I was born in Kent, Ohio. Actually, the hospital was in Akron, which was a little ways away, but Kent was a smaller town where Kent State University was, and my dad taught there. And then I grew up there until I was ready for second grade. And then we moved to Illinois, to Charleston, Illinois, in the central part of Illinois, East Central. And my dad taught in the college there. And then I went to grad school. Well, I went through college there at Eastern Illinois University and in Charleston, Illinois, and then went to grad school at University of Wisconsin in Madison for library school. And my first professional position was at Ohio State University in Columbus, and was there for several years, and then moved to Florida and fell in love with Florida, Gainesville.
Great.
Yes.
So can you tell us when you were born?
Oh, yeah. February 14, 1939.
Okay. And then, so you were born in Kent, Ohio.
Yes.
How long did your family live there?
We lived there. Well, I'm not sure how long they had lived there before I was born, but then we moved when I was in second grade, starting second grade.
Okay. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about with your story today is that you got polio as a child. Can you talk about that, how old you were, when you got it, what the circumstances were around that?
Yes, we were in Charleston, Illinois by that time. And I went to the lab school on the campus there. And it was actually summer vacation when I was 13. And I was with my family on a trip out west, and it was a wonderful trip by car, and my sister and me and my parents. And this one night, well, in the evening, we were in North Dakota, and my dad and I took a long walk, and it was quite hilly in that town. And so I was really tired when we got back. And then in the night, I had just prickly sensation so much of the night, and I couldn't sleep. And my parents thought there were bed bugs, and they were so upset with the hotel we were staying in and so on. But then the next day, when we were traveling and I got out to use the restroom, my legs just collapsed. And so we knew it was something more. And we went on to the cabin that they had reserved at a state or national park, I'm not sure. And we moved into that cabin, and I just got sicker. And so they called a local doctor, and the doctor thought maybe it was the flu. Apparently I was way more sick than I knew from what I've been told since, just very, very sick and high fever. And so then I got feeling better enough that the doctor said he thought we should just go back home. My parents should just take me home. So they had to carry me to the car, and we did make the trip back in probably record time to Illinois. And a woman, across the street, I guess, saw that we were back and called on us, and an elderly woman, and she had a ointment she said would help for sure. So for several days, we rubbed the black ointment into my leg that was the weak one, and didn't help. And I mostly had to crawl around because I couldn't walk or else be carried. And then they decided to, I'm not sure, I think the doctor came to the house. Doctors did make house calls then.
Mhm.
And I should go to the local hospital for diagnosis that it might be polio. And the local hospital did diagnose polio, but wanted me to go to the University of Illinois hospital up in Champaign-Urbana, about 50 miles away. So we did that. That was Labor Day. They took me up there that fall. And then I was in the hospital there. They did say, yes, it was polio. And I was in the hospital for a month there. And at first, I was in a room with another person, a child, and we were in isolation, I guess you would say. We couldn't have visitors except once in a while, it seemed like the other child's father would be able to come in. And my dad would come up each evening after teaching and kind of be around like in the hall or something. My mother took it so hard that she had kind of a breakdown. It was very, very hard for her, and she couldn't come to visit or anything. And I had a little sister who was 5, so that my mother and sister were at home. And my dad came each day. And first I had the Sister Kenny treatment, where they wrap your affected leg or arm, whatever, in very, very hot packs several times a day, and a board at the bottom of the bed so that your feet don't, the muscles don't shorten. You keep your feet on there so your foot is up in a, as if you were standing. And I don't know how long I was in that unit, 2-3 weeks maybe. And then I was well enough, I would guess I wasn't contagious anymore, they thought, which I may not have been in the beginning, but I think they didn't know enough about it. So they put me in a regular hospital room. And this was a hospital that was Catholic. And so there were nuns, and they would come around, and they were just so sweet. They would come around and talk, and and people sent books, and it was just, people really tried to make it as good an experience as it could be. And soon they put another girl in my room who was feeling kind of down. She was in an iron lung, and she was my same age. Her name was Peggy. And so that was nice. I got to talk to her some, although I could only see her in a mirror at the front of the iron lung. And her parents came a lot during the day, so that was pleasant. And then my father always came at night or in the evening. And I read the whole carton of Nancy Drew books.
So what year would this have been?
1953.
53.
So it was just a little bit before the vaccine was discovered. But and I did then have the vaccine after, but I was in college by that time. I think I was in college by the time I had the vaccine.
And I'm curious, your sister was with you at the time. Did she get sick at all? Did she have?
And my mother had kept us so careful over the summer. We liked to go to the city pool, but we didn't do that. We were just extremely careful. And Mother said later, she thought maybe part of the reason that I got this was that she was always so careful and so clean. And I've read this, that they think this may be that we don't get the antibodies building up that maybe we need. She was a very good housekeeper and cook.
Yeah, and especially, I guess, if you aren't exposed at an early enough age, then it's more likely to become the paralytic. So, and that's one of the things about polio, that it really struck everyone. It wasn't just like limited to the poor or something like that.
That's right.
But it's interesting when you got it, you weren't really in an urban area. Were you around other children at all? Do they know kind of when you were exposed or how?
No, I don't know that. That's a really good question. Um, we did stop at, we always did on a trip, a lot of tourist things, stopping at museums and all at parks where we would take hikes and so on. So it's possible that there were other children there or that we went to a playground. I don't remember that specifically that we did, but we certainly went to lots of museums and places like that. So I would have encountered other people.
Okay.
But I don't know how long the incubation period is and whether, because it really wasn't too far into our trip.
Okay. So you could have been exposed before you left
Yes.
home, and then
There was a lot of polio in Charleston, where I lived, Charleston, Illinois.
And I'm kind of curious. So you're not the first person that I've spoken to who developed the symptoms and was actually sick for a while before they diagnosed polio. And it's just kind of curious to me that on the one hand, you had so much fear about it, but then doctors didn't necessarily seem to be really ready to diagnose it as polio. Did you?
Yeah. My dad felt that the doctor knew that it was polio. He felt this later, and that the doctor just wanted to get us back home. And it was in a park, a national or state park, in a cabin where we're staying. So, that was an unusual setting for the doctor, and whether maybe the doctor felt that if he put me in a hospital there, it would be difficult for the family and so on. I don't know all of that, but my dad always felt that the doctor was probably pretty sure, but told them flu.
Well, and I guess that makes sense. Also, it would have been a lot harder for your family to have you in a hospital so far away and to be visiting you, and what would your sister do and all of that. That it was better for you to be closer to home.
And to be with our family doctor, I guess, who had been our doctor for all those years, Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you had a roommate who was in an iron lung. Were you ever in an iron lung?
No. My polio seemed to affect my left leg and my stomach and back muscles, but not my breathing. But Peggy was, and she seemed to be affected not on legs or arms, but just her breathing, because later she could get around very well after she was.
After she recovered her lung breathing muscles recovered.
Right.
Well, that is interesting. So you were in the hospital for a month. Was there any concern once you came home about, like, among people who maybe weren't as educated about polio as to whether you were still infectious?
Yes. Some people would not let their child come to visit me. I had very few visitors, and told by one family that they weren't allowing their child to come because they were worried that he might get the sickness. So mostly I was just with my family there, and I just stayed in my room. We had a 2-story house, and so I couldn't get up and down the stairs. So they got me up there. I was there, and then finally did get to where I could scoot on my bottom up and down the stairs, but that takes some strength, so it took a while to build up to that.
So, I guess too, if you said that your leg and then your back and stomach muscles, did you have trouble sitting up at that point too, or could you if you were propped up? Or
I don't really remember trouble sitting up. I would want to lean on something. Yes, I'd want to have a back on the chair or what. Yeah. And we did physical therapy, my parents for quite a while would drive me 3 times a week to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and I would go to physical therapy there. And they taught my mother, oh, she got feeling better after about a month, and then she could help. And so, but she didn't drive when we were going up to the university, but then at home, she learned to do the exercises with me. And there was a very heavy metal, we called it the iron foot, that she would have to strap to my foot as a weight. And then I would practice lifting my leg and bending my ankle and so on. And we did that more than once a day for quite a long time. We did exercises.
Wow. So did you have a brace as well, or were you able to?
Then right at first, I guess I didn't have a brace. And then soon I got a full leg brace that went all the way from into my shoe and then to my stomach area, and a big band, leather band around there, and then a kind of a corset back brace. And so I would wear those, and it had a thing at the knee that you could move up or down, a ring type round thing, and that would straighten and make the knee lock into positions. When I would stand up, I would put that down. I had to actually do it, but I could do it through my slacks. And then that would lock the knee in place. And I walked with crutches also. And then I improved to, and when I would sit down, I would have to undo that little piece. And then I just kept exercising. And by that time I was going downstairs, I guess scooting down, and was able to, sit in regular chairs and so on, not be in bed during the day. And I just gradually got better. And when friends would come, I remember that it was really important to me to be kind of like before. So I would insist on getting up and walking them to the door or something like that. And they would say, no, don't get up. But for some reason, it was important to me to be as normal as possible, which may have helped because that's a little bit more exercise.
Definitely it meant that you were moving around, and I can certainly appreciate that desire to fulfill kind of what you would ordinarily do, rather than maybe
be just a sick person. Yeah. Right.
So, and you mentioned that there were relatively few visitors and that some parents were afraid you were contagious. Did you have anyone who was maybe actually, they weren't actually downright unpleasant, it was more just avoidance, but did you have people who were scared and made that fear obvious to you?
Not to me, but I remember my mother talked with the mother of one of the people that I had enjoyed having visit. And then this was a boy, and then he stopped coming. And my mother talked with his mother and found out that they didn't know he was coming at first. And when they found out, they told him he couldn't because they were worried about it. And so that made us feel bad that, that they were so worried about it. And we felt from what we had learned that I wouldn't be contagious, and we certainly wouldn't have intended to let him come if we had thought that I was contagious.
Sure, if there was any chance that that you could infect him, you wouldn't have exposed him to that.
Right. And by that time, my sister had started nursery school too, and which we wouldn't have done if we thought there was a chance that she could infect someone. She had they'd held her back for a while I was in the hospital, so she could help my mother during the day when my dad was teaching. But then after I was home for a while, she started nursery school.
Mhm. Did you ever talk to her about her reactions to your illness? Was that, or have you spoken with her? What was it like for her?
A little bit I have. She doesn't seem to, she was so young, she was 5. She
Sure.
doesn't have real strong reaction about that. I was really interested in that. How was that for her? She remembers a lot how she took care of my mother. When my mother had kind of a breakdown because of her worry over me, then I guess my dad would fix up lunch before he left, and then my sister would go down and get it. So she had a lot of responsibility at age 5. Mother was in bed upstairs and didn't go down at all, as I understand. So, you know, I think it was a time that must have been, in a way, nice for her, because she was with my mother all day, and my mother was stuck in bed, and I bet they read a lot of books. She loved to read, and just, but she didn't seem to have strong memories about me or about how that was for her. With, I think my parents must have been just wonderful at the way they juggled all of this, because it has to have been very difficult to support each of us in the way that we needed.
Sure.
And my dad to keep on with his teaching, and he was department chair. I don't know how he did it.
Wow, that is wonderful that they were so conscious of both of your needs, and that they really tried to make sure you both were having those needs fulfilled.
Yes.
Because I could certainly see too, for the child who's not sick, that they might feel like attention was being taken away from them. But
that's right.
Your sister got a lot of attention.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to feel that way, that even after I come home, that attention taken away from her.
So you mentioned that you were in the hospital for a month, and then you were home and you were recuperating. At what point did you go back to school?
Oh, well, then I had a tutor at home. So this started in Labor Day, and then it must have been during that same term that I started having a tutor, maybe in October, something like that. And we had a kind of an extra room upstairs that was my mother's sewing room and our playroom and so on. So I would go in there, and the tutor would come up each weekday morning for a while and keep me up. And I managed to, pretty much keep up with the same work that my classmates were doing, and finish 8th grade just like they did. I went back to school then in January, and we had a very steep driveway. And so it was quite something to navigate all of that. But as I remember, my mother would get me out, and she was up and driving by this time again. So we would get me in the car and then drive up to the school, and they got permission to drive up really, really close to the door. And she would take me in a wagon or a sled, because it was icy and slick. And then I would luckily my classroom was on the first floor, 8th grade. And so we would go there, and I would take my lunch because I couldn't get to the lunchroom, which was upstairs. And so everyone else, that wasn't so good, really, the way they didn't, I think, do the best they could have. They left me alone in that room at lunch. And when it was playtime, I would go out on the playground and sit alone at the side. But I was glad to be back in school. But there just wasn't, I think it could have been done better, somehow helping to have more interaction and so on. So then 8th grade ended, and then we were in a portable building we started there junior high in 7th. No, it must have been in 9th grade and 10th grade. So we were in a portable building, and I was able then to walk pretty well and got down to a cane. And even I still remember the day that I forgot my cane from one room to the other and realized that I did it without thinking about it. I forgot it. That was really delightful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started high school the next year, and it was in a very old building on the campus that had very small steps, not very high, I mean, and that was good. And they had a railing. So get up and go to my classes, which all were on the 2nd floor of that building. And that worked out quite well. I've always had a memory of one day when this guy who was real popular, a cheerleader, and I was going up the stairs very slowly. I was always late because it took me so long. And he said, what's the matter? You look really sad or something. And I said, oh, I'm doing the best I can, trying to get up the stairs. And I realized, wow, he didn't care about that. I must have looked kind of morose, So I realized that people didn't really care about that if I was slow. And I learned that I could just, if I would smile and not worry about that myself, then other people didn't either. That was kind of a turning point.
That they would respond to how you were, like your demeanor more than
rather than if I would, they weren't noticing so much that I walked funny or that I was slow. They were more noticing my smile or lack of it or how I was feeling.
That's great. So you found then that your peers at school were they supportive then, or those who knew, those who didn't, it wasn't really
Yeah, I think they were pretty supportive in high school. Yeah, that worked out well. And I was able to do all my classes and yeah. I guess I was, of course, not really able to go to extra advance very well because it was harder to get around. But going during the day, being there, it was pretty normal, I think. Even though I was using a cane and braces.
Okay, so you still wore braces?
Yeah, not the full leg. I'm trying to think. I really can't remember just what brace I had then, but I'm sure I did.
But you did graduate from the one that would strap around your waist to one that was less, smaller and more.
Yeah.
Do you remember how long like the physical therapy continued?
Well, going up to the University of Illinois was several months. And then my mother doing it at home with the things that they had shown her to do. So all of that, that went on for years, I think. I mean, just keeping up the strength and strengthening some more.
Kind of catching up and then making sure that you were continued to be in good shape.
Yes. And then by the time I graduated high school and then started college there in the same town, I was able to walk from my home to the college. And that was maybe 8 blocks. So there was somewhat of a hill So I felt good about that.
Mhm.
And I guess now that I think about it, the last year of high school, I was able to ride the school bus, and my mother didn't have to take me. She was always so good about taking me places, though, making it easy as she could.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, just, I think we're about half an hour in. Do you need a break or to get a drink or anything?
Thank you. That's sweet of you. How about you? Do
Uh,
you?
I'm good.
I'll take a sip of coffee. I have it right here.
Okay.
I haven't thought about these things for so long. It's kind of interesting to think back.
Mhm. Sure. Um, and I'm curious too. I know for some people, remembering the experience was part of how the family operated. For other people, they didn't really ever talk about it in the family. I'm curious as to how much your family maybe talked about the experience or remembered it, or did they move forward?
I would say we moved forward. We really didn't talk about it very much. My dad was a scientist, and I was very interested in science, and we were um, we were very kind of matter of fact, I think.
Mm.
So we really didn't talk about feelings very much at all. And I don't remember us really discussing this, except my dad telling me one time when we were driving to physical therapy, he told me that he was very, very disappointed because he had prayed for me not to have polio when we were out there on the trip.
Mhm.
He said it wasn't polio, and then it was, and he felt kind of betrayed. That was hard for him.
Mhm. Mm. Mhm. So then, when you mentioned you'd graduated from high school, you didn't feel like you were particularly singled out in high school.
No, I didn't. And the first time I wore high heels, I was asked to be to lead the procession in. I was a junior actually then in high school, lead the seniors in. That was quite an honor. And I insisted that I had to wear high heels for that with a
Wow.
gown on. And I tottered my way through and didn't fall. My mother was so upset with me.
Wow. Well, so you must have gotten to the point then where you could walk without a brace. Because I can't imagine a brace really fitting in over.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I wasn't wearing a brace then. Yeah. And then I didn't wear a brace for many, many years until about 1987, around then, when I was working at the University of Florida in the libraries, and we were in Weil Hall then in the engineering library. And I tried out different areas to park and kept trying to find closer and closer places. And I remember that it got more difficult. And then I thought I would have to just quit work there because I couldn't, it was getting too hard to get from the parking lot to the library. And I told someone, and they said, well, call the parking office on campus, which I did. And they gave me a parking spot of my, so right building. So wonderful the way there were accommodations, but you had to think to ask for them.
Mhm.
And, I guess that was a thing. My mother came up with a phrase that I would put down if I ever needed to that said, slight weakness in left leg.
Mhm.
And so that I was admitting that there was a problem,
Mhm.
but downplaying it.
Mhm.
And I think in those days it was more important to do that.
Mhm.
Now that would be, people would need to make accommodations if accommodations were needed. But then there weren't any, there were very few curb cuts, and that just wasn't the way things were done to accommodate. I had to accommodate to manage. But then when I did ask for the park, did say that about the parking, sure enough, they came right up with it.
I would wonder now if you would even need to ask, or if they would be asking you. I'm just kind of, because as you're talking about, society does seem to be more conscious of, I guess, in some ways, leveling the playing field and making sure everyone has what they need to function.
Yes, that's definitely true. And a lot of those things are required now, having a ramp or having curb cuts, and there's so many things that make it easier now. Great. Although some of them are what I call fake accommodations, because it will be a ramp maybe, but it's way too steep, or because they just made it over where there were steps, and there wasn't enough space maybe to make a really appropriate ramp.
Yeah, so that there's really no way for someone to roll themselves up the ramp. You would have to be pushed.
And I often can't get down it either. I just think it's too steep to be safe, so I have to look around.
So then you mentioned, I'm going to just go back and you mentioned that you went to college in your hometown. Did you live at home that whole time?
I did, yes. And that made it much easier because they were so wonderful about driving me places, and I could still do things. I joined a sorority, but I didn't live in the house. And my parents would drive me there for meetings. And so that worked out well. I did have to be very careful. I was lucky that my dad taught on campus, and we had snow and ice there. So I learned the janitor practices in each building, and especially one that had a very slippery place that you had to go in. When you went in the door, then there was a slope down, and if people had come in with wet boots and stuff, it was a mess. So I learned when they cleaned that up and dried it, and my dad got me elevator passes for some of the places that the students couldn't use the elevator, but that faculty could. And I had many classes in his same building because that's a science building, and I was a science major. And so I really got used to watching very closely for every hazard and memorizing, what I needed to do and when I needed to go in and out and so on. That was the start, which I still do that. I mean, that was the start of making that work, by noticing what I needed to do to stay safe. And having really good boots too when it was going out.
Interesting. But then when you went to library school, or let me, before I even ask you about that, what kind of science did you major in?
Well, I started in physics, which is what my dad taught. And then I got so interested in zoology, I changed to zoology. So I ended up with major in zoology and minors in botany and physics and math.
Wow.
And became a science librarian. So that worked out really well, that I had that science background and the math.
Definitely. So at what point then did you decide you wanted to become a librarian, and what was your kind of thought process about that?
I see my iPad here is saying low battery. Can we stop while I go and plug it in and go in a different location?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.